Hi guys, how are you all? I hope everything is good at your end. Yes? Okay, so basically this video is for the much awaited thing, that is yes, as you can see here on the board, it is for the revision lecture. It is for the revision lecture of economic laws, paper 4 law, and in that it is about the economic laws in around 9.5 hours. Okay, approximately in 9 hours we are going to try to revise entire economic laws from paper 4 point of view. Since it is a super quick revision, okay, since it is a super quick revision, we will try to cover 90 to 95% of the entire syllabus, but in a super quick manner. We are going to touch upon each and every provision, okay, almost each and every provision. I'll try my level best that we do that. Yes, and this can be referred by the new syllabus students, right? This can be referred by the new syllabus students, plus it can also be referred by the old syllabus students for the common topics, right? It can be referred by the old syllabus students also for the common topics which are included in this particular video. Now coming on to ma'am, from where have you taken, okay, what notes are we supposed to refer along with this? So let me tell you, for this I have used my 5th edition book, the book which I author, the 5th edition book which was applicable for the November 2020 examinations. I have used that particular book, and if you do not have the book and if you wish to study, if you wish to revise from this particular book, you can just buy it out from our website, that is arpitatulsian.com. which I feel if you are in a dual mind that should we go for the book or should we not, then in that case, yes, if you're using these particular revision lectures plus this particular book will definitely help you to get an exemption. Don't worry about that. Okay, so in these 9 hours, I hope these 9 hours would be really productive for you. It will be really helpful for you to revise the entire economic laws, right? And if you feel that you enjoyed these lectures, if you feel that those were good for you, those were helpful for you, do let me know. It adds on a motivation for me also, right? So this was all about the introduction for the revision lectures, and now you can just go ahead and you can start these revision lectures, right? Thank you so much, all of you. Enjoy the revision lectures and do let me know if you love them, right? Thank you so much. Okay, so let's start with a super quick revision of Money Laundering Act 2002. First of all, the basic meaning of the term money laundering, as we always understand, is conversion of illegal money, right? First of all, earning the illegal money and then converting that illegal money into legal money, or trying to show that illegally obtained money as if we have earned it from the legal sources. Then uske baad mein next thing is your purpose of the act. We had 3 things in the purpose of the act. First one was to prevent money laundering. Second one was confiscation or arrest of that particular person. Third one was to combat means to reduce the channelizing of money into illegal activities, right? Then after that we had seen the 3 stages of money laundering. ठीक है, आंख बंद करके just close your eyes and try to recollect. Okay, 3 stages of money laundering. What were the 3 stages of money laundering? The 3 stages of money laundering. First one was placement. Placement was the stage where the money is earned, right? The money is put into the system. The money is earned from illegal activities. Next thing, the second step was your layering, right? Layering was such a step where the money, whatever illegal money we have earned, we were just dividing that money into different transactions, right? Maybe giving some amount as gift or depositing some amount into bank accounts, etc. In different places, we were just spreading that particular transaction so that it becomes very difficult to find out the origin of that particular amount. And the last one, the third stage, was your integration. Integration is such a stage that where your black money or your tainted money or not so clean money gets mixed up with your white money, and now it becomes almost near to impossible to find out that this is the money which was earned from the illegal sources. Then after that we did the definitions. We did some important definitions. In the definitions, The first one, okay, everyone concentrate. The first one was the definition of money laundering, for which I told you to remember the section. It was section 21P, right? When we go to section number 21P, they had told us that 21P, it's written in 21P that the definition has been assigned the meaning in section number 3, right? In section number 3, when we were studying, any person whosoever is directly or indirectly does that akka, where that person attempts to indulge, or that person is knowingly assisting, or that person is knowingly is a party, or that person is actually involved in any process or activity, connected with proceeds of crime, including its CPU and CPA. CPA stands for concealment, possession, acquisition, right? Then claiming it as untainted property, then projecting it as untainted property and its use, then such person shall be guilty. Of the offense of money laundering, right? Then after that, they had just inserted an explanation, which we are not yet sure that whether the ICAI is going to notify it or not as on today, that this process of money laundering is going to be a continuing activity. That is, till the time the person enjoys the proceeds of crime, till the person enjoys this particular proceeds of crime, till that time he will be guilty of the offense of money laundering, right? Out. The next thing was the definition of proceeds of crime. Proceeds of crime was what? Proceeds of crime was nothing but a property, any property which was derived, okay, any property which was derived by any person directly or indirectly, out of what? Out of the criminal activity. Which criminal activity, ma'am? Which relates to your scheduled offense, right? And this can be held in India or this can be held outside India. So it should be basically derived from some criminal activity which pertains to the scheduled offense, right? Then after that, the next thing that we had taken the example was, if suppose we had derived some cash out of the scheduled offense, and if that cash is also put in a bank account, the interest earned on this particular cash will also be treated as the proceeds of crime. Okay, connecting definition we'll do immediately. That was the definition of property. Then we'll come back to the old ones. Okay, property definition, because we had just seen the term property here, right? We had just seen the word property. That's why I'm just going to the definition of the term property. Property was nothing but any movable assets, any immovable assets, any tangible, any intangible assets, whether corporeal, that is material or immaterial, including any deeds, title, rights, etc. in that particular property, wherever located, whether located in India or whether located outside India, that is treated as property as per the Act PMLA. Right, next thing was nothing but a very simple definition, that is payment system. Payment system is what? Payment system is nothing but a system that enables a payment to be made between two persons. Who two persons, ma'am? Between the payer and between the beneficiary. I had told you to write the examples for all these things. We had discussed about settlement, we had discussed about debit card, credit card operations, NEFT, RTGS, ECS, etc. All these are the examples of your payment system. And the next definition which comes up here is the definition of the scheduled offense, which is very, very important just for your understanding, right? What was this definition of scheduled offense telling us? Definition of scheduled offense was, it is nothing but three parts. We had made three bifurcations for that. Any offenses specified under part A of the schedule, or any offenses specified under part B of the schedule, but provided the total value involved in such offense is more than or equal to rupees 1 crore. That customs offense which we had seen, customs offense section number 132 of the Customs Act. And the last one was offenses specified under part C of the schedule. Okay, offenses specified under part C of the schedule. And for your knowledge, I had at the end of the book, I had just shown you that which all offenses are covered in all those parts. Right, now going on to the main section, that is section number 4, which is very, very important. Section number 4 basically talks about the punishment for the offense of money laundering. If any person is convicted for the offense of money laundering, then in that case, by default punishment is imprisonment ranging between 3 years, of not less than 3 years, which can go up to 7 years, and fine of any amount without any limit. But if that person commits the offense of money laundering under para 2 of part A, under para 2 of part A of schedule, that is the schedule offenses, that is under Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act 1985, then that person will be liable for punishment, that is imprisonment not less than 3 years, but which may go up to 10 years, and fine of any amount without any limit, right? This was the punishment given under section number 4. The next one was a very simple section which was talking about verification of identity by the reporting entity. whenever any particular, they were focusing mainly on the reporting entity, saying that this is the person through whom there are very high chances that the black money gets converted into white money, right? So there were 4 methods of authentication. First one was your online authentication under Aadhaar. We had discussed about OTP systems, biometric, retina, etc. Second one is your offline authentication under the Aadhaar Act. Third one was use of passport under the Passports Act, and the fourth one was talking about any other officially valid document as notified by the central government can be used for authentication. In this, they had told that banks in reporting entity also, specifically the banks are supposed to give the they are supposed to do the authentication by way of online authentication method. But suppose if any particular person is not required to obtain Aadhaar, then the bank has to make all the other 3 modes also available to its clients. Okay, and the other entities other than the banks, the other reporting entities, they have to go by the last three methods. And if they want to go with the online authentication method, then in that case they have to make sure, okay, they have to make sure that they fulfill all the privacy and the security standards. And how to fulfill that, etc., everything will be prescribed by the central government. And whenever any authentication is done, like online authentication, etc., in Aadhaar, etc., is done, then in that case none of the reporting entity should save our Aadhaar number in their database, right? And plus they should not save the biometric thumb impression, etc., also with them. This is what we had studied in section number 11A. Now going to the next important answer, that is section number 12, right? Section number 12 was talking about, obligations of the reporting entity. In this we had studied mainly 3 obligations, if you remember it very nicely, and I know you remember it very nicely. The first duty of the reporting entity is to maintain the record of all the transactions for a period of 5 years from the date of the transaction. Second point was to furnish the information to the director. Director means that government official, that is the directorate, right? And the third one was maintaining the record of all the documents, between the client and its between the client and the reporting entity, and that has to be maintained for a period of 5 years. 5 years after the business relationship between the client and the reporting entity has ended, or the account has been closed, whichever is later. So for that much time it has to be maintained, and whatever information, whatever records, whatever documents, etc., are maintained, furnished, etc., everything should be kept confidential. This is what we study, right? The next important thing coming up there is section number 12A. Okay, section number 12A. Section number 12A talks about access to information. In this I had told you to remember only 3 terms, my dear students, only 3 terms. First one is the director can call for the information. It can call for the information which we maintained above, in the above section number 12, or in the next coming section, that is section number 12AA. Whenever it calls for the information, it is the duty of the reporting entity to furnish this particular information, and whatever information is sought by the director here, okay, whatever information is now with the director, even that has to be kept confidential, right? Even that has to be kept confidential. Going to the next section, next section is section number 12AA. What is this section 12AA, ma'am? Section 12AA was your enhanced due diligence done for some specified transaction, only for those high cash deposit or cash withdrawal transactions, forex transactions, high import transactions, etc. For them, the reporting entity was supposed to exercise enhanced, more care, right? More prevention was to be done in this particular section. And in that there were some methods by which, three methods by which we were doing this enhanced due diligence. First one was authentication. Online authentication should be done under Aadhaar. If Aadhaar is not required, then the authentication should be done by any other processes, right? Then second point was we have to check for the OFS. OFS stands for ownership, right? F stands for checking the financial, means checking the ownership, checking the financial position, and checking the sources of the funds, from where is the client earning the money, right? And then the last point was to take some more additional steps to find out the purpose of the transaction, that why is the client and the third party entering into such type of transaction, and what is the relationship between these two people. Okay, if we are able to check each and everything, then in that case, then only the reporting entity will allow the client to do the specified transaction. If even one of the thing is not fulfilled, then in that case it won't allow the client to do the specified transaction. Suppose if all the conditions are fulfilled, then the specified transaction will be done. No doubt in that, right? The specified transaction will be done. But later on, if they come to know that something is, something is not clear, something is suspicious, etc., or it might involve proceeds of crime, then in that case, it will do now greater scrutiny. It will impose greater scrutiny on these particular transactions. And whatever documents you had or whatever information you had gathered in this A, B and C points, as you can see here on the board, whatever information you could gather in this A, B and C point, that has to be maintained for a period of 5 years. Okay, that has to be maintained for a period of 5 years. As you can see here, it has to be maintained for a period of 5 years from the date of the transaction. This was your section number 12AA. Right, the next section comes up is section number 13, which talks about the powers of directors in relation to the reporting entity. Means the director can do the inquiry. Okay, it can do the inquiry in respect of the reporting entity. It can either do it suo moto, or it can do when someone has made an application to the director. Then director can tell the reporting entity to get it books of accounts audited. This audit will be done by the chartered accountant, but the expenses will be borne by the central government. And the third one was, if the reporting entity, its employees, its director still does not obey or still does not comply with the obligations, etc., then it has 4 options available with it. It can give warning, right? It can give the directions to comply with any instructions. It can tell the reporting entity to do periodic reporting, and the last one, if nothing works, then it can impose a penalty ranging between rupees 10,000 to rupees 1 lakh for each failure, right? But here only penalty can be imposed, but no civil or criminal proceedings can start against the persons mentioned, right? That is, no civil or criminal proceedings can start against them. We cannot make a case out of it, right? We cannot give any imprisonment, etc. also for not giving any particular information, because we know that if the director does not get information from here, it can get information from any other sources also. And how to maintain the information, how to furnish the information under section 12. Remember, where we were maintaining it for a period of 5 years, etc., how to maintain it, how to furnish it, in what format it has to be done, everything will be done. Everything will be done by the central government in consultation with the RBI. Okay, everything will be prescribed by the central government in consultation with the RBI, right? Now, the next important section which comes up here, is section number 5, which talks about the provisional attachment mainly. Right, whenever the director, enforcement director, whenever the director or the officer, but not below the rank of the deputy director, means at least he should be of the rank of deputy director who is authorized by the director. Okay, if they have the reasons in writing, okay, if they have the reasons to believe in writing that so and so person is having the proceeds of crime, or so and so person is likely to conceal it, so and so person might transfer it to some other person, and because of that it can lead to a bigger case, then in that case, okay, whenever they have got such a doubt, then in that case the property can be provisionally attached. Before attaching the property, there is a small legal requirement. That they have to forward a report to the magistrate or the court stating that, sir, we are going to do the provisional attachment. This can be done under PMLA also, and this can be done, okay, whenever we receive a request from the other country's government also for doing this, right? Now, suppose if it's an emergency case that we cannot wait until we, till the time we go and file it with a magistrate or the court, etc., then in such case, filing the report with a magistrate is not a prerequisite requirement. Then first you can do the provisional attachment, and then you can go and file the report with the magistrate. Once the provisional attachment is done, it will be valid for a maximum period of 180 days from the date of the order, right? In between, if we get any stay order, okay, if the proceedings are stayed by the High Court, then whatever number of days by which it was stayed, that much number of days will be added, right? That much number of days extra we are going to get, plus ad hoc period of 30 days also we are going to get, right? But this is only applicable when there is a stay. Otherwise, normally it is going to be valid for a maximum period of 180 days. Okay, and as soon as the provisional attachment order is passed, from that day, within a period of 30 days, the director will go and submit all its facts. It will just file a complaint before the adjudicating authority, who is the next level of authority, stating that, sir, I have done the provisional attachment because of so and so reasons. Right, in provisional attachment, that particular person can still enjoy the property. that particular person can still enjoy the property. The only restriction that we are making, the only restriction that we are putting on that particular person is you cannot, the only restriction that we are putting on that particular person is you cannot sell off this particular property, right? You cannot sell off this particular property. That is the only restriction. Next thing which comes up here is section number 6. Okay, how do we, ma'am, what is this adjudicating authority? Ma'am, what is this adjudicating authority? What was this adjudicating authority, or how do we form it? First of all, adjudicating authority. Adjudicating authority is constituted by the central government, right? It is formed by the central government. It can form whatever number of adjudicating authorities it wants. In adjudicating authority, it should have one chairperson and 2 other members. And these 2 other members should have the experience in LAFA, right? LAFA was law, accounts, administration, finance, or law, accounts, finance, administration, whatever you want to call it, right? These many members, right? These many members would be there. Now, ma'am, what is the work of this adjudicating authority? Let's study that in section number 8. Okay, once the adjudicating authority receives that complaint, from whom did it receive the complaint? It received the complaint from the director. Once it receives the complaint under section 5, then in that case, it is going to issue a show cause notice. It is going to issue a show cause notice on that particular person, asking him to give the reasons that why we should not declare as if your property is involved in money laundering, and please show the sources of your income and sources of your funds, that from where have you earned it. For that particular period, for that particular purpose, we are going to give him a time period of at least 30 days. Okay. If the property is kept in someone else's possession, we are going to issue the notice on that particular person also. If the property is co-owned, then we are going to give the notice to both of them. Means it will be given to all the co-owners. Now once we are, after that we are going to receive the reply. Okay, now depends. Suppose if we receive the reply, okay, and if the reply received is a satisfactory reply, then in that case the case gets closed then and there itself. If suppose the property was provisionally attached, if it was earlier provisionally attached, then it will be released now. But if the property that we have received, if the reply that we have received is not at all satisfactory, if that is a nonsense reply, okay, or it is a obviously unsatisfactory reply for the adjudicating authority, then in that case the adjudicating authority will confirm the attachment. It will confirm the attachment. If suppose earlier provisional attachment was done, then now it will be attached. If earlier no provisional attachment was done, then now it will be directly attached. And if at all there is no reply received at all, then it is by default assumed as if the property is involved in the offense of money laundering, and then again the attachment order will be passed. Okay, once the attachment order is passed, this attachment is valid for a period of 365 days, right? This is valid for a period of 365 days, and this becomes final as soon as the special court passes, as soon as the special court passes the order of confiscation. Okay, this order of confiscation is passed by whom? This is passed by the special court. For this particular 365 days, again if there is any particular stay levied, then we are going to get that many number of days extra. But remember, here we are not going to get what? Here we are not going to get any ad hoc period. Okay, now when the case goes to the special court will finally determine whether it is involved in money laundering or not. If it determines that yes, it is involved in money laundering, then the property stands confiscated. Property stands confiscated to the central government, and if the property is not, if there is no offense of money laundering, then finally the case is closed and the closure report is submitted to the special court by its judges. Right, then after that, suppose if there is any particular person who claims that, okay, say for example, if there is any particular co-owner who claims that I was totally unaware about this particular thing and I have suffered a loss because my other co-owner had, had hidden this fact from me, that that this particular property is involved in money laundering, then if you prove this fact before the special court, then the special court can direct the central government to compensate the other person with the particular interest. Then, whenever the property gets confiscated to the central government, it goes to the central government free from all the encumbrances. That is, no liability goes along with the asset. The central government will just enjoy the asset. The liability will still stay on your head only, means we are not discharged from the liability. Right? Another thing, till here we were studying everything about the confiscation. Now comes the pointers about the arrest. Okay, now comes the pointers about the arrest. Now, Suppose see, now if property is not involved, say for example there was no property involved, but if we just want to arrest any particular person, or if along with confiscation we want to arrest any particular person, then ma'am, what is the process? Okay, now see, just remember one thing, any offenses under PMLA is a cognizable offense, right? That is a cognizable offense. Cognizable offense means arrest can be done without an arrest warrant, right? Arrest can be done without an arrest warrant. So now ma'am, who has the powers to go and arrest? I'll tell you. Director, deputy director, or any other officer authorized by the central government. Okay, any order will be passed by that by the central government on the officer. So director or DD or any particular officer authorized by the central government, if they have reasons to believe, they should have reasons to believe. Otherwise, a separate penalty is there for them if they do it for time pass. Right? They should have reasons to believe with them in writing that so and so person is guilty with the offense of money laundering. Then in that case, we can arrest that particular person. Okay, now when you are arresting that particular person, then on what reasons you have arrested, etc., this order copy will be forwarded also to the adjudicating authority just to keep him in the loop, right? In a sealed envelope, we are going to forward him the copy. The person who was arrested will be taken to either to the special court or judicial magistrate or metropolitan magistrate, whatever is there in their jurisdiction, and he will be taken to these particular courts within a period of 24 hours of his arrest. And this 24 hours is going to exclude the traveling time. This is what we had studied, right? Now arrest point gets over here, right? Now after that, one more thing applicable here is whenever we are arresting any particular person, then we'll have to first give a cognizance, right? We'll have to give the cognizance of the offense. That is going to come up later in the notes, so we are going to do it later, don't worry. Then after that, now say for example, if the reporting entity, if the reporting entity is aggrieved, just try to understand. If the reporting entity is aggrieved by the order passed by the director, or director is aggrieved by the order passed by the AA, or the person is aggrieved by the order passed by the AA, then that person has an option that he can go and file an appeal before the appellate tribunal within a period of 45 days from the date of receipt of the order. He can go and file an appeal. If there is a sufficient cause, example death, etc., then in that case this 45 days means the delay can be condoned even beyond a period of 45 days. Ma'am, how many days? That has not been specified in the act. Okay, now then the matter goes to the appellate tribunal. Right, once the matter goes to the appellate tribunal can pass, either it can confirm the order, or it can modify the order, or it can set aside the order, right? But everything will be done only after giving a reasonable opportunity of being heard. First, they are telling that AT should try to dispose it of as early as possible. Okay, AT should try to dispose it of as early as possible, and then they are telling endeavor should be made to dispose it of within a period of 6 months from the date of filing the appeal. And once the appeal decision is finalized, then that copy will be forwarded to whatever parties are there in the appeal, and additionally to the adjudicating authority or the director as the case may be. Ma'am, who is the appellate tribunal here? Appellate tribunal under PMLA is not directly given, but we are taking the reference from the one specific act called as Smugglers and Foreign Exchange Manipulators Act 1976. The appellate tribunal who is there under that particular act, same person is going to act as an appellate tribunal under PMLA. Okay, so time period here was 45 days and 6 months, don't forget that. Next thing, ma'am, what powers does this appellate tribunal have? Appellate tribunal has all the powers as mentioned in the Code of Civil Procedure. Civil code powers it has minimum. Plus, it can regulate its own procedure, it can make its own extra powers, it can exercise some things on its own also, and plus it should be guided by the principles of natural justice. That is, before giving any particular conclusion, it is necessary for it to give a reasonable opportunity of being heard to all the parties who are present before it. Ma'am, what do you mean by the powers of civil court? Ma'am, what do you mean by the powers of civil court? Powers of civil court is nothing but what? Summoning any person, enforcing the attendance of any person, and examining any person on oath. Second one was discovery and production of documents. Then taking the evidences, receiving evidences on affidavit, self-sworn document. Right. Then giving orders, issuing commissions for examination of books, records, documents, etc. Then passing any ex parte orders, reviewing its own decisions, etc. Right. These all are the powers which are there with the civil court, and same powers, same powers are vested with the appellate tribunal also. Right. Now, this appellate tribunal, as we already know, it works in form of benches, right? It works in form of groups. Generally, there is a chairperson. Generally, there is one judicial member and one technical member, right? If there is any dispute, if there is or equality of votes between the judicial member and the technical members, etc., or between the members of the tribunal, then they are telling, first of all, by default rule is all the decisions will be taken by majority. But ma'am, what if there is an equal majority? Then what are we going to do? Then either the chairperson will involve himself or the chairperson will put one more member in the bench, and then we are going to take a revised majority, and that will be final and that will be binding, right? Now, whenever we want to go and file any appeal, okay, whenever we want to go and file any particular appeal, then in that case, appeal can, for going and filing any appeal, either we can go on ourselves or we can appoint any authorized representative who can appear before the appellate tribunal, okay. But when the party, okay, when the party is the director, etc., director, adjudicating authority, etc., then they can appoint, the CG or the director can appoint presiding officers to present the case, right? The next thing which is coming up here, is civil court not to have jurisdiction. Means civil court will not entertain any particular case under PMLA. Right, civil court will not entertain any particular case under PMLA because we have got authorities here who are going to deal with the respective cases at different levels. Nor the civil court will grant any injunction, any stay, etc. No orders will be passed by the civil court in this particular act. It does not have any particular powers. Okay, don't forget that. Next, coming on to the next thing, that is next level of appeal. Now, till now the order was passed by the appellate tribunal. Now, if any person is aggrieved by the order which is passed by the appellate tribunal, that person can go and file the appeal before the High Court within a period of 60 days, right? Within a period of 60 days, which can be further extended by maximum another 60 days if there is any sufficient cause, right? And whenever we are going and filing any appeal before the High Court, it can be only on any question of law or question of fact. So, and once the decision, we are no one to tell to the High Court that you have to dispose of the appeal within so and so time. There is no time period specified under PMLA for the same. Now, coming on to the most important court in this particular chapter, that is the special court. Ma'am, what is special court? Special court is nothing but the session courts, right? Session courts are designated. These are designated by whom? These are designated by the central government after consulting the Chief Justice of the High Court. Whatever number of courts we require, that many number of special courts will be designated for respective jurisdiction, and as soon as it is notified, it will be written in the notification. Okay, it is going to consider the offences under section 3 of the Act, that is offences of money laundering. It is going to do the trial of the offences which are punishable under section 4 of the Act. Okay. Now, special court is not only there only for PMLA, it is going to do try the offences of other acts also, and it is mainly regulated, right? It is mainly regulated by the Code of Criminal Procedure, 1973, right? Another important, very important answer, section number 45. Section number 45 says that offences under PMLA, like I mentioned just some time backwards, offences under PMLA will be cognizable and non-bailable, right? What do you mean by cognizable, ma'am? Cognizable means that person can be arrested without an arrest warrant, right? And non-bailable means that person cannot be released on bail. That person cannot be released on bail except under some circumstances, right? Now, first one, ma'am, what was the first exception? Public prosecutor should be given an opportunity to oppose the release. And if he opposes the release, but still the special court is of the opinion that this person will not commit any particular offense even if he is released on bail, then in that case that person can be released on bail, right? Second one, if there is any particular person whose age is under 16 years, or if that person is a woman, or if that person is sick or infirm, or if that person along with any other co-accused person is liable where the sum involved is less than rupees 1 crore. In all these cases, if the special court directs, then that person can be released on bail, right? Now here they are telling that whenever that particular person was arrested, okay, at that time special court has to be given a cognizance of the offence. That is, we have to go and give a note of this particular offence to the special court. Ma'am, who will give this? This will be given by either the director or by the CG officer or by any central state government officer who is authorized by the central government, right? Then after that, some general points were given up there, that who is this public prosecutor? Ma'am, this public prosecutor is no one but a normal advocate, a practicing advocate having 7 years of experience under union or state, who is having good special knowledge of law. Then we had seen the types of authorities under the act, right? In our regular lecture, we had seen it in the beginning itself. We have director, then we have the additional director, then we have the joint director, then we have the deputy director, then we have the assistant director, and then we have other class of officers, etc. Right? And these authorities also, they have got all the powers as vested in a civil court, right? Just like the powers were there with the appellate tribunal, right? Same powers are there with these particular directors also. Then the last few sections left here is now contracting state. Okay, contracting state is nothing but the other foreign country or territory with which the Indian government is having a treaty or an arrangement, right? Now, for what purpose do we need this? For cross-border implications we need this. Ma'am, what do you mean by the offences of cross-border implications? Now, suppose if the conduct by if any particular person has done any particular activity, obviously this relating to this criminal activity of scheduled offence, etc., which has been done outside India. Okay, if that has been done outside India and the proceeds of crime has been brought to India, or vice versa, the activity has been done in India but the proceeds of crime has been taken outside India, then in that case it will be treated as an offence having cross-border implication. So ma'am, what to do for that? So for that, to be on a safer side, what you can do is you can enter into an agreement with foreign countries. Ma'am, what are the two primary reasons? Or what is the benefit of entering into a treaty with some other foreign country? Benefits of that is, first one, we can enforce the provisions of the act, right? If we have agreement with any other country, we can enforce the provisions of the act. And second is mainly for exchange of information. Okay, mainly for exchange of information. Ma'am, suppose now, if we actually want to make use of this particular treaty, okay, if we want to make use of this particular treaty, then in that case, there is a concept called as letter of request. Okay, if we need the help, if the investigating officers under PMLA, any level of officers, directors, etc., if any level of officers need any particular help, then in that case, they can go and make an application to the special court. If the special court thinks fit, okay, they'll have to convince the special court that, sir, this evidence is available only outside India. And if the special court is satisfied, then in that case, the special court will go and make an application or will go and submit the letter of request to the authority of the other country, and then accordingly we'll receive the information and we can proceed with the case after that. Next thing is, suppose if the other country requires any help from us, then in that case we will receive, okay, central government will receive the letter of request from the other country, and after that we can act on it, right? If when the central government receives it, the central government will forward it to the PML authorities or to the special court, and then we will provide them whatever information is available with us, right? Then another thing was two important sections, section number 62 and section number 63. Section number 62 was a search which was done for no reason, that is a vexatious search done. That is, if any particular authority, any particular director, etc., who does any search or who causes any search or who causes any arrest to be made without any reasons recorded in writing, then that person after conviction, that person will be liable for imprisonment up to 2 years or fine up to ₹50,000 or both. Okay. Then after that, the similar thing, if any person gives any false information about the other person and he causes the search to be done of the other person or causes the arrest to be done of the other person, then the person who has given false information, that person will be liable with the same punishment, that is imprisonment up to 2 years or fine up to ₹50,000 or both, right? Then any person who willingly, knowingly, if he misbehaves, that he does not answer the question which was asked by the authorities, he does not sign the documents which he was supposed to sign, he was given any particular summon, but that is he was asked to submit any particular documents, he was asked to attend the office of the authorities, etc., but he did not do it knowingly, then in that case, after giving a ROBH, a penalty ranging between ₹500 to 10,000 can be levied for each default on that particular person, right? And for these particular sections, that is 62 and 63(1), cognizance, that is special court will not suo motu give imprisonment. Cognizance has to be given to the, that is note has to be given to the special court that, sir, please consider this case, and that note can be given to the special court only after obtaining the sanction of the central government. So first the complainant has to go to the central government. Central government will either approve it or reject it within a period of 90 days, and then only if it approves, then only we can go and submit the note with the special court, and then only the special court is going to act. Okay, and all these procedures are regulated by the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973. Then whatever information was there with the directors or the prescribed authorities under PMLA, we had studied that all those information has to be kept confidential. However, they can share this information with the other law authorities also, right? They can share the information for the purpose of levying of tax, that is with income tax, GST, etc. They can do it with the FEMA authorities, they can do it with the drug offense authorities, etc. Then it can do it with any other authorities also which have been specified by the central government. There is no harm in sharing the information with any other authorities, right? And then now the general provisions, whenever any fine or penalty in the entire chapter, whenever any fine or penalty has been levied, then we have to pay it within a period of maximum 6 months. If we do not pay it within a period of maximum 6 months, then they are going to, director or the other authorities are going to recover it from us as per the method which was given in the income tax provisions, right? Another thing was offenses by the companies. Whenever any particular company has committed any offense, then they are telling the person in charge will be guilty and he will be liable to be proceeded against, right? The monetary fine is on the company, and the imprisonment, etc., is on each and every defaulting person in charge. Okay, but there are only two cases. Where he can be saved. That is one thing if he proves, okay, subjective. If he proves that this offense was done without his knowledge, or he had exercised due diligence to prevent such kind of offense from happening, right? Then in that cases all, suppose if he is not covered in this, apart from this, whoever was guilty or whoever was present at the time the offense was done, that particular person would be liable, right? Then this PMLA is going to have overriding effect on any other law, right? So if there is any contradicting provisions about money laundering in some other act also, then PMLA is going to override. Another thing, last important thing coming up here is, whenever that person who was, who was the aggrieved person or who was a guilty person here, if that particular person passes away during the proceedings, or that particular person becomes insolvent, then ma'am, how is it going to happen? Okay, then in that case, say for example, if that person was supposed to go and that person was planning to go and file the appeal before the appellate tribunal before he passed away or before he became insolvent, then in that case, and in the meanwhile he passed away or he became insolvent, then in that case the legal hire or the official assignee in case of insolvency, that person can go and file the appeal before the appellate tribunal or the high court, as the case may be. And about the recovery of fine, see, imprisonment won't be applicable on the legal hire or the official assignee. In case of monetary fine, it will be recovered from the legal hire to the estate, to the extent of the estate which was taken from the deceased person. And in case of insolvency, ma'am, what to do with the fine? Whatever amount the official assignee could recover from the assets of the insolvent person, that much amount we can recover in the law. And in case of insolvency, that insolvent person can still be sent to the jail because he is at least into existence, then he can be sent to the jail. And last then we studied was that money laundering is not siphoning of funds. Siphoning of funds is nothing but where you are trying to remove the money illegally, but the money was not earned from illegal sources. In money laundering, the source of money itself was illegal, right? So money laundering is way too ahead and way too advanced as compared to the siphoning of funds. And after this Amendment Act 2009 has been passed, they are trying to combat, they are trying to reduce this money laundering activities, they are trying to prevent the terrorist financing, etc. They are trying to keep a larger check on banks, casinos, financial institutions, etc. And because of this, yes, India has also entered into the FATF, that is Financial Action Task Force, in which they are trying to combat the money laundering, right? And these time periods, etc., whatever is given in your book, at the end, all these things we have already considered. So this was all about your PMLA revision. I hope you all have understood this properly. Let's start with the revision of SARFAESI Act 2002. Full form of SARFAESI is securitization and reconstruction of financial assets and enforcement of security interest. There are three terms in the chapter. First one is securitization. Second term is reconstruction of financial assets, or we can call it as asset reconstruction. And the third part is enforcement of security interest, right? So now first let's try to understand with the help of this particular diagram, or if you have already studied, then just try to recollect by closing your eyes. Just try to recollect this particular diagram by which we are going to understand the entire concept of securitization. So first of all, in your securitization, you have your borrower. Borrower is the person who has already taken the money from the bank. He has already given secured asset. He has already given some security to the bank or to the financial institution who is called as a originator in this particular chapter. So borrower has taken the money from the originator and it has given a secured asset to that particular originator. But now the borrower fails. To pay that particular money. Originator has tried its level best to recover the money from the borrower, but the originator is now not able to recover the money from the borrower. So for that purpose, the originator or the banks or the financial institution goes and approaches the ARC, that is the Asset Reconstruction Company, or the SPV, that is your special purpose vehicle, which is nothing but a person who is going to act as a recovery person for you, just like we called it as a Vasuli Bhai, right? So now the originator is going to go to the ARC or to the SPV, and it will tell that, sir, I am having a headache on my particular head. That is, I am having a loan, that is an asset for the originator. It is an asset. I have an asset on my head from which I am not able to realize any money, and that asset, as you can see there on the board, that asset is called as a financial asset. So the originator, as per the agreement between the originator and the ARC, the originator transfers the headache. Originator transfers this particular financial asset to the ARC or to the SPV. It also, in addition to the financial asset, it also transfers the secured asset which was taken from the borrower, right? So now basically the originator has given the financial asset, originator has given the secured asset to the ARC, and in return ARC will pay the money to the originator, right? ARC will pay the loan amount to that particular originator. From where will the ARC raise this money? The ARC is going to raise this money from the QIBs or from the investors. It is going to raise the money. Now when we take the money from the QIBs, we have to issue them the security receipts, right? So the ARC is going to issue the security receipts to the to the investors or to the QIBs, and in return it will take the cash from them. This cash will be ultimately paid to the originator, and because of this the originator gets free from the picture, right? After this the ARC or the SPV will utilize its powers. It will utilize its powers and it will recover the money from the borrower. After recovering the money from the borrower, it will pay periodical returns also to the investors, etc. And on the respective due date, it will redeem the security receipts, right? As in when the security receipts are redeemed, can I say the QIBs go out of the picture? As soon as we borrow the money, as soon as we recover the money from the borrower, even the borrower gets out from the picture. The originator was already out from the picture earlier itself, right? So now ultimately this particular project, this particular loan, etc. has been fully settled by this particular asset reconstruction company, right? So basically here the major role of the ARC was just to help the originator by applying its extra powers to recover the money from the borrower, and then temporary by working on the money of the investors, because temporary we worked on the money of the investors. Temporary by working on the money of the investors, we helped the originator by realizing the money from the borrower, right? This was the concept. The same thing has been put up in the words here. The same is the concept of your securitization, right? Now this securitization is done by whom? This securitization is done by the Asset Reconstruction Company. This is done by the Asset Reconstruction Company. So now let's learn something more about Asset Reconstruction Company. Two sections are very, very important here. One is section number 3 and the other one is section number 4. Section number 3 is going to talk about registrations of the ARC, and section number 4 is going to talk about the cancellation of certificate of the ARC. Now, first of all, ARC, Asset Reconstruction Company, comes under the purview. Asset Reconstruction Company comes under the purview of the RBI. So, it has to first obtain a There were two prerequisites. First of all, it has to obtain a certificate of registration from the RBI, and it will get the certificate of registration only if the first basic requirement is fulfilled. That is, it should have a net owned funds. It should have net owned funds of at least rupees 100 crore or any higher sum as may be prescribed by the RBI, right? This should be the basic prerequisite requirement, right? This is the basic prerequisite thing which is to be required. Only if this condition is fulfilled, then only the RBI is going to grant you the certificate of registration. But for granting this, even though you have fulfilled the basic prerequisite requirement, even after that, it is going to check 7 points. Okay, it is going to check 7 points of yours. Now let's try to recollect those 7 points. First one, that ARC should not have suffered any losses during the last 3 years, right? It should not have suffered any losses during the last 3 years. ARC should have made adequate arrangements for 3 things. ARC should have made adequate arrangements for 3 things. First one, realization of the financial asset. Financial asset was nothing but the loan. That is, it should have made the plan that how are we going to realize the loan from the borrower. Second was to pay periodical returns. To whom are we going to pay the periodical returns? We will pay the periodical returns to the QIBs. And the third one is to redeem. Whenever the security receipts becomes redeemable, at that time we have to redeem. So adequate arrangement for these 3 things have to be done by the ARC. Right. Then the third point was the directors. The directors of the ARC should have adequate professional experience. Okay, what professional experience, ma'am, what degree, what qualification, etc. That will be specified by the RBI to that particular ARC. Then none of the directors should be convicted of any offence involving moral turpitude, any grave offence. Right. Then the sponsor means a person who is holding the paid up share capital of more than or equal to 10%. That person should also be a fit and a proper person. Fit and a proper person as per whom? As per the criteria specified by the RBI. Then ARC has complied with, or the ARC is in a position. ARC either it has already complied with or it is in a position to comply with the prudential norms as specified by the RBI. And the last point was an etc. type of point where the ARC has to comply with any other one or more conditions as specified by the RBI. Okay, I am repeating these 7 points again so that it gets fit in your mind. First point was ARC should not have suffered any losses during the last 3 years. Okay, ARC should make adequate arrangements for 3 things. First one, what was the first one? Realization of financial assets required to pay periodical returns and then to redeem the investments of the QIB. Third point was the director should have adequate professional experience. None of the directors should be convicted of the any offense involving moral turpitude. Sponsor should be a fit and a proper person as per the criteria specified by the RBI. ARC has complied with or is in a position to comply with the prudential norms as specified by the RBI, and the ARC has complied with one or more conditions as specified by the RBI. Right, if all of these conditions are fulfilled, okay, if all of these conditions are fulfilled, then in that case the RBI is going to grant you the certificate of registration, no issues in that. But if any of the condition is not fulfilled, then in that case the RBI will first give you a reasonable opportunity of being heard, and only if the RBI is still not satisfied, then only it will reject your application. And once, listen, try to understand, try to recollect, once the application is here rejected, then no appeal is possible, because now the RBI had already given the criteria that you have to fulfill so and so criteria. If you have not fulfilled, then in that case no appeal provisions are applicable here. Okay, and once, say for example, if I have been granted, okay, if I have been granted the approval by the RBI, then they are telling that basically three things. Whenever you are doing any changes in the 3 things, you have to take the prior approval of the RBI. Okay, if you recollect, then without looking at the board, you can just try to recollect the answer with me. Okay, three things for which you have to take the prior approval of the RBI. First one, whenever there is a substantial change in management, whenever there is a change in the address of the registered office, and whenever there is any change in name. If any one of the thing also changes, then we have to take prior approval of the RBI. Right. Then after that, now once we have granted, say for example, if we have been rejected, then you are totally out of the picture. But if we have been granted the certificate of registration, then there are 7 circumstances. Okay, mainly they have listed 7 circumstances where our certificate of registration can be cancelled. Again, who is going to cancel the certificate of registration? The one who granted us. The one who granted us was the RBI. So the RBI may cancel here the certificate of registration if 2 times cease to, 5 times fails to. Okay, if the ARC ceases to carry on this main business of securitization or asset reconstruction, if it ceases to hold investments from the QIB, if it fails to comply with RBI directions, if it fails to comply with RBI conditions, if it fails to maintain the proper books of accounts as per the law, if it fails to submit the books of accounts for its inspection, or if it does not take the prior approval of the RBI whenever it was required. Ma'am, when it was required? For the above 3 points which we just studied, whenever there was any change in management, address change, name change, etc. Right? So now we can just repeat it without looking into the book. 7 cases. First one, it ceases to carry on the business of securitization or asset reconstruction. Then it ceases to hold investments from the QIBs. It fails to comply with RBI directions. It fails to comply with any condition. It fails to maintain the books of accounts. It fails to submit the books of accounts for inspection, or it fails to obtain the approval of the RBI whenever it was required. Okay, if any one of the point is attracted, then the RBI will first give us the reasonable opportunity of being heard, and then if it is still not satisfied, then it can straight away cancel our certificate of registration. Okay, now listen, one important point here. Whenever here our certificate of registration is cancelled, okay, but if the ARC is not satisfied with that particular cancellation, then it can go and file an appeal before the central government. Ma'am, to whom in the central government? To the Secretary of Ministry of Finance. Okay, to that particular person we can go and file an appeal within a period of 30 days. Okay, as soon as we get the communication from the RBI that your certificate has been cancelled, from that day within a period of 30 days you can go and file an appeal. You can go and file an appeal within a period of 30 days. Okay, now after this, the decision which will be given by this particular Secretary of Ministry of Finance, that will be full and final, and this is not further appealable. Right? Now listen, suppose if finally we come to a conclusion, that a certificate is going to be cancelled. If we come to such a conclusion, then in that case we will still be deemed as, okay, we will still be deemed as ARC till the time, okay, they are telling here for the interest of the investors, we will still be deemed to be the ARC till the time all the investments have been paid back, okay, or all the money has been paid back to the investors. This is done why? This is just done to protect the interest of the investors, or we can say to protect the interest of the QIB. Right? This was one particular section. Then after that, a few one-time read sections coming up here. Now here they are telling that as soon as there is an agreement between, try to recollect that diagram. Okay, as soon as there is an agreement between the this originator, that is your bank, PFI, etc., and the ARC. Remember, we were transferring two things. The financial asset, that is the loan, was transferred from the banks, etc., to the ARC. Then even the secured asset was getting transferred to the ARC. So every right in that particular asset comes to the ARC now. And before this, suppose if any legal suit was filed by the bank or the financial institution in any court or the DRT, now there is going to be a substitution of name. Means that case is not going to get over just by this transmission, but as soon as the case comes, or as soon as the loan comes from the bank to the ARC, at that time even the case comes in the name of the ARC. That is, ARC will have to go to the court and it will have to get its name substituted, and after that it may abate the case, or it can apply for closure of the case. Okay, then the next section was talking about consortium financing. Right? In consortium financing, what was happening? In consortium financing, a group of banks had funded a single borrower. So all these group of banks were having a single security. Right? They were having a single security which they had taken from the borrower. So now imagine all these, say for example 3 banks were there. All the 3 banks had funded a single person. Now these 3 banks have gone and filed a legal suit in their jurisdictional courts or the jurisdictional DRT for recovery of money from the borrower. But now they all cumulatively, they all mutually decide that let's go and approach the ARC. So now when the case comes in the hands of the ARC will go to their senior. Okay, ARC will go to the senior of the DRT. Means, see now, as of now, the three respective cases were pending before respective DRTs. Now, before any particular AT, okay, before any particular jurisdictional AT, the ARC can go and it can apply for substitution of the name. Okay, the case gets merged into one particular case and then the name of the ARC is substituted there. The only difference here is the ARC will go to the appellate tribunal. Ma'am, which appellate tribunal will it go to? It will go to any one of the three DRTs. Like in our example, here we had three banks. So can I say all the three banks would have gone to the respective DRTs? Example, one is DRT of Mumbai, another one is DRT of Pune, another one is DRT of Bangalore, say for example. So you can go to any one of the respective appellate tribunal and you can get the case consolidated, merged and the name be substituted there. Right, and then whenever the bank, financial institutions, etc., whenever they get out of the picture, okay, means whenever they are handing over everything to the ARC and before they exit, they have to make an application. They have to make an application or they will basically intimate the borrower. Okay, the bank will intimate the borrower that now I am going to go off the picture. I am going to go off the picture. If you plan to make any payments, okay, if the borrower plans to make any payment, please do not make the payment in favor of the bank, financial institutions, etc. Directly go and make the payment to the ARC because now our case is with the ARC. Right. Similarly, they were telling us here that whenever, now we are talking about the transaction between the QIBs and between the ARC. Okay, we are talking about the transaction between the QIBs and the ARC. Whenever the ARC raises money from the QIB, it has to issue security receipt. Right, issuing security receipt is mandatory. For that, we'll have to frame a particular scheme. Right, a particular scheme will be framed and then we are going to issue the security receipts to the QIBs. Right, then in that case, we are also going to make sure that the QIBs are paid the periodical returns on time. Otherwise, why would they invest in the ARC? And plus, they are going to get their money on time at the time of redemption. All these things we have to ensure. Ma'am, we means whom? Means the ARC has to ensure that they are not hampering, they are not destroying the interest of the investor. And whatever security receipts, okay, whatever security receipts are issued by the ARC to the QIBs, all these are nowadays registered under the SEBI Act, right? These are registered under the SEBI Act. So that's why registration under a particular act is not required. Okay, if you have studied once, you should be able to recollect registration under the Registration Act. Registration under the Registration Act 1908 is not at all required, right? So till here, basically right from section number 5 till section number 8, you had all the one-time read sections. Now comes the next important section, that is section number 9. Right, section number 9 provides about measures for asset reconstruction, which is the second part of the chapter. Okay, first part was securitization, second part talks about your reconstruction of financial assets, or you can call it as asset reconstruction. So now asset reconstruction, as the name suggests, this will be done by whom? Asset reconstruction will be done by the ARC only. Ma'am, how can it do asset reconstruction? What are the measures of doing asset reconstruction? So we have got a code in that particular answer, and the code is management sale reschedules the specs. Right, where management, okay, again here we are going to get 7 points here. First one is either proper management, means the ARC can get involved in the management, or the ARC can take over the management of the borrower's business, or it can sell or lease the whole or part of the undertaking of the borrower's business, or it can reschedule the debt. Maybe it can provide more time period for payment of this particular debt. In specs, S stands for settlement. It can agree with settlement with the borrower, means it can say that, okay, instead of paying full 100%, pay 80%, pay 70%, as the case may be. So it can enter into settlement. Okay, P stands for possession, taking possession of the secured assets. Right, if you want to realize the money from the security which was given by the borrower, so before selling that, we'll have to take the possession of that. So we'll take the possession of that. Then we can even do the enforcement of security interest. Ma'am, what is enforcement? Enforcement means actually selling of the security which was given by the borrower. Borrower at the time of taking the loan, it would have given some security. Now first we took the possession of that particular secured asset, and now we are giving the now we are selling of that particular asset. Okay, selling of that particular asset is nothing but enforcement of security interest. and the last word CS. Last word CS stands for conversion of debt into shares. Can I say in our balance sheet, the bank, PFI, or the financial institutions or the ARC would be standing in the liability side for us, right? So now if we are not in the position to pay off the loan, then in that case we can issue them the shares in lieu of the loan. Means instead of loan we can give them the shares, okay, which is nothing but one of the method of your internal reconstruction. Okay, so I'm again revising these points for you. Total 7 points were there. First one, proper management or takeover of management of the borrower's business, then sale or lease of whole or part of the undertaking, then rescheduling the payment of the debts, then settlement of the debts, then taking possession of secured assets, then doing enforcement of security interest, and then conversion of debt into shares, right? Any one of them can be used for the measures of asset reconstruction, right? Any one of them can be used. So now we have just understood one thing is ARC can be engaged into two main activities. Okay, ARC can be engaged into two main activities. First one is the securitization thing, and the second one is asset reconstruction. Okay, securitization was the first answer that we studied, and the asset reconstruction was the last, section number 9, that we have studied. So now, ma'am, ARC can do only these, or ARC can do other things also? Yes, ARC can do other things also. ARC can do other things also, but only after taking the prior approval of the RBI. Ma'am, what other things can the ARC do? ARC can act as a recovery agent. ARC can act as a recovery agent for the banks, etc. It can act as a receiver. Okay, it can act as a receiver whenever it is appointed by the court or the tribunal, or it can act as a manager. Okay, manager for managing the property. We are going to study this in section number 13. Manager as per section number 13. Okay, so 3 things. It can act in 3 capacities. First one is a recovery agent for the banks, etc. Then it can act as a manager as per section number 13, and then it can act as a receiver. Okay, receiver generally when it is appointed by the court or the tribunal, right? But it can act in these capacities only after taking the approval of the RBI, because initially we had taken the approval for the RBI only for 2 businesses, that is for securitization and asset reconstruction, right? Then they are telling that while solving such a big dispute, okay, that is the main dispute is between whom? The main dispute is between the banks and the borrower, or we can say it is between the borrower and the ARC now, right? Intermittent, that is in between there can be disputes, maybe between the banks and the ARC, maybe there can be disputes between the ARC and the QIBs, etc. So here they are telling that while solving such a big dispute, okay, if you come across any small problems, then make sure that you do not drag those problems to the court. Instead, you can settle those problems by way of conciliation or arbitration as provided in the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996. Okay, so out of small problems, please do not create a big one. Already you have a big problem to be solved there, right? Then after that, now we have certain powers of the RBI coming up here. Now RBI is exercising powers on whom? In this particular chapter, RBI is exercising powers on the asset reconstruction company, right? So now they have just broadly classified into 3 parts. First one is RBI has the power to determine policies. Okay, policies for whom? Policies for the ARC, and to give directions. Okay, this we have already studied before also, that RBI can give directions to the ARC and the ARC has to comply with this. Ma'am, what kind of policies are you talking about? It can be about how to maintain the books of accounts, maybe. It can be about income recognition. It can be about provision for the bad debts. It can be about the capital adequacy ratio. It can be about the risk-weighted assets. About all these things, these are just the illustrative examples. Okay, about all these things, the RBI can issue directions or it can frame the policies for the ARC. Okay, this was one part. Okay, second part is it can call for information. RBI can call for information from the ARC. It can call for some statements from the ARC. It can call for some documents from the ARC, etc. Right? And the third one, last part is it can tell the ARC to get the audit done, or the inspection done, right? To carry out the audit and inspection. And whenever the RBI tells us this, okay, whenever the RBI tells the ARC that you have to get the audit done, you have to get the inspection done, or we will appoint the officers to do inspection, etc., at that time it is our duty, okay, it is a duty of the ARC, it is the duty of the officers, employees, etc. of the ARC that they should cooperate and assist with the RBI person. Okay, and if the RBI comes to a conclusion that there is some problem in the management, then it can remove the chairperson, it can remove any other director from the ARC company, it can remove it from the asset reconstruction company, and instead of that, okay, instead of those defaulting persons, it can appoint additional directors. Okay, instead of the old management, it can appoint additional directors, plus it can appoint its own officer who can act as an observer. It can appoint its own person who can act as an observer. Observer means a person who is going to report from time to time, who is going to communicate to the RBI from time to time that how is the ARC performing now, right? Then after that, the most important section of the chapter, that is section number 13, right? Section number 13 talks about what? Section number 13 talks about enforcement of security interest, right? It talks about enforcement of security interest. Ma'am, enforcement of security interest was a part of asset reconstruction also. This we had studied in section number 9. So either you can do it as a measure of asset reconstruction, or you can simply do it. Okay, means the bank can also simply do it, or it can be done by the asset reconstruction company also. Because, okay, now I'm going into the content of the chapter, content of the section. Enforcement of security interest can be done by the banks, by the financial institutions, or even by the asset reconstruction company, and that too without any intervention or without any prior approval of the court or the tribunal, because it's always written in the loan agreement that if the borrower fails us to pay the loan amount, okay, then in that case we can do the enforcement of security interest. Okay, now listen, for this first we'll have to wait for the loan to be classified as NPA. Okay, we'll have to wait for the loan to be classified as NPA. NPA classification happens after a period of 90 days from the due date. Okay, once the due date is there, once you get the due date, after that means whatever is the due date of repayment of loan, after that, after a period of 90 days from this particular date, the loan is classified as NPA. Okay, as soon as the debt is classified as NPA, then in that case the secured creditor, ma'am, secured creditor means whom? Secured creditor means the bank, financial institutions, or the ARC. Okay, it will give a notice. Okay, it will give a, just like a demand notice, it will give a demand notice to the, or just like a warning notice, it will give to the borrower that boss, you have to make the payment within a period of 60 days from the date of this notice. We are giving you 60 days time from the date of this particular notice that you have to pay your liabilities in full, and if you do not pay in full, then we are going to do enforcement of security interest under section number 13. Okay, we are going to do this under section number 13. Now, there can be possibilities that once the borrower sees that particular notice, he plans to pay the amount, right? If he pays the amount, then there is no problem. Or if he thinks that no, there is some problem with this particular notice and he raises the objection. Okay, the borrower raises any particular objection. Now, when the borrower raises the objection, then in that case, the objection will be submitted by the borrower to the secured creditor. Okay, now once the secured creditor receives that particular objection, either it can consider it or it can say that this is not acceptable. Okay, if it says that this is not acceptable, okay, if the bank or the financial institution says that no, your objection is not at all sustainable, then within 15 days, okay, within 15 days from the date when we have received the objection from the borrower, from that day, within a period of 15 days, we are going to again intimate to the borrower that boss, why have we not accepted your objection? Okay, so basically 60 days time period was given. 60 days time period was given to the borrower to make the payment or to raise the objection if any. And then once we receive the objection, once the secured creditor receives the objection, within a period of 15 days, we are going to intimate them if we have not accepted their objection. Okay, now in this case, again a second round of raising the objection etc. is not going to happen. Once we have intimated them that your objection is not sustainable, after that we can exercise a few measures. Ma'am, what measures can be exercised? Ma'am, what measures can be exercised? For this PMNM was the code that we had studied. P stands for taking the possession. Now see, if we want to do enforcement, then we'll have to take the possession of the secured assets. Right, then next M stands for we can take over the management. Suppose if we think that the value of the security interest is not sufficient. So in that case, we can even take over the management. Okay, we can take over the management. We can handle their business till the time we don't realize the money. Right. Then in that case, after that, another option available with us is we can appoint, the secured creditor can appoint any person as manager, just like we had seen earlier. Any person can be appointed as a manager who is going to manage the assets. Maybe he'll see that is the asset saleable, at what best value it can be sold, are we supposed to incur any expenses for selling this asset, etc. All these things will be handled by the manager. And the last one was, if the secured asset is kept with any other person, then we are going to issue a demand notice to that third person that now the secured creditor is going to have the right on this particular asset. Right? So the code was PMNM, where P was standing for taking possession of the asset, M was standing for taking over the management, of the business. Then another N was standing for giving notice, demand notice to the third party, and M was standing for appointing any person as manager. Right? This was applicable for section number 13. Now here they are telling that what if the borrower now plans to pay the money? What if the borrower says, no, I don't want to get into all these things, I will pay the money. Then no problem, we will not do enforcement, we will allow him to pay the money. Okay, what if the company is not returning back the money of the debenture holders? Then in that case, debenture trustee can do the enforcement. Debenture trustee can do the enforcement, but only after waiting for a period of 90 days. Okay, just like in banks we waited for NPA. Here also we are going to wait for a period of 90 days. Then only after following the full procedure of section number 13, only after that it can do the enforcement. Okay, then in case of consortium financing, there was only one asset given to all the banks together. So now when are we going to do the enforcement? Suppose if one agrees, if two disagrees, then what are we going to do? Then we are going to check the value. Okay, we are going to check that the secured creditors who say that enforcement should be done, those persons should be holding at least 60% of the total outstanding debt. Okay, if that person is holding at least 60% of the outstanding debt, then in that case enforcement is going to happen. Okay, so basically here, if majority having 60% of the outstanding debt says yes, enforcement should happen, then in that case we will do the enforcement. Okay, then suppose while doing all these process, if the company decides to go for winding up, then in that case we shift from SARFAESI Act to the Companies Act, and the winding up will be done as per the Companies Act. Okay, and if we are not able to realize the money, the full money from the enforcement of security interest, then for the balancing amount, we can still go and make an application to the court or the DRT saying that, sir, we have not received so and so amount. So we file a case for recovering the balance amount. Okay, then for section number 9, that is measures of asset reconstruction, and for section number 13, that is enforcement of security interest. In both these particular sections we had studied that possession of secured assets can be taken. Okay, if the secured creditor is not able to take the possession of the secured asset, then it can go and seek the help of an authority called as CMM or DM. CMM stands for Chief Metropolitan Magistrate, and DM stands for District Magistrate. Okay, we can go and seek their help, and if we go and seek their help, they have to assist us within a period of 30 days. Okay, we can tell them that, sir, please help us in getting the possession of the asset. Sir, please help us in getting the possession of the papers, documents, etc. So whenever we make an application, from that day within a period of 30 days, they have to help us. Suppose if they are not able to help us within a period of 30 days, then we are going to get an extension of another period of 30 days. So maximum within a period of 60 days, the CMM or the DM, as the case may be, is going to help us. Right? Then comes the next section, that is section number 15, a very important section. Section number 15 talks about manner and effect of takeover of management. Okay, now takeover of management again came in two sections. It came in section number 9 also, the first point, proper management and takeover of the management, and it also came in section number 13, that is your enforcement of security interest. Okay, now whenever the secured creditor takes over the management, right, in that case they have to publish a notice about this in 2 newspapers. Okay, in 2 newspapers a notice will be published about this. Ma'am, in which 2 newspapers? One is the English language and the other one is the local language or the vernacular language of that particular place where the borrower's office is situated. Okay, once this happens, after that, once we give a notice, then in that case, the secured creditors will appoint new persons in the management. Ma'am, why new persons in the management? Because now we have taken over the management. If we have taken over the management, then the existing management persons will vacate their offices and now our persons will be appointed in the company who is going to, or in the management who is going to run the show ahead. Right? Then after that, now here they are telling that once the management is taken over, then shareholders' rights get withdrawn. Okay, shareholders' rights get withdrawn. Ma'am, which rights get withdrawn? Shareholders cannot appoint the directors. Okay, shareholders cannot appoint the directors. Shareholders cannot pass any resolution without taking the approval of the secured creditors. And shareholders cannot file any or cannot pass any resolution, or they cannot proceed for winding up until unless secured creditors have given their approval, because now there is a shift of control, right? There is a shift of control from the shareholders to the secured creditors because default has happened with these particular secured creditors, right? And once these particular secured creditors get their money back, okay, once they get their money back and once they are totally, out from the company's balance sheet, then they are liable to restore the management. Okay, they are liable. They have to compulsorily restore the management. They have to appoint new persons before they exit the company. Okay, but in case if their debt was converted into shares, so now they become the part of the shareholding, then in that case it is not their liability to restore the management. Then now when the old managerial persons were told to vacate their offices, okay, can I say this is nothing but a premature termination? So in this case of premature termination, they are not eligible for any compensation for loss of office. Okay, this term is important. Compensation for loss of office they are not going to get, because it is kind of such a thing that they have done default. They have defaulted with the secured creditors, and that's why when we are removing them, they won't be eligible for any compensation for loss of office. But yes, if they were eligible for any salary or remuneration or sitting fees, by whatever name you want to call it as, for the period for which they have served earlier they were serving in the company, right? So for that, or any other amount is due to them from the company, that will still be paid to them. So only what won't be paid to them is the compensation for loss of office, right? Now let's go to the next part. Next part is your appeal provisions. Okay, next part is your appeal provisions. Now if any particular person, okay, generally the borrower, etc., if any particular person is aggrieved by the measures, which we had taken under section number 13, if we were aggrieved by the measures taken means that PMNM point, if we were aggrieved from that, then in that case we can go and file an appeal before the DRT, Debt Recovery Tribunal. We can go and file the appeal before the DRT within a period of 45 days. Okay, whenever the measure was taken, 45 days from the date of the measure, whenever that measure was done, from that day within a period of 45 days, we can go and file an appeal before the DRT. Okay, ma'am, which DRT? You can go to any 3 DRTs, any of the 3 jurisdictional DRTs where the cause of action arises, location of the borrower, where the secured asset is located, where the possession of secured asset is there, or where the branch of the BFI is maintaining this particular account. Any one of the 3 DRTs, you can go and file the appeal. You can go and file the appeal within a period of 45 days. Okay, when you go and file the appeal before the DRT, now it is in the hands of the DRT to decide the case. Either it can give the decision in the favor of the borrower, or it can give the decision in the favor of the secured creditor. Suppose if it gives the decision in the favor of the borrower itself, then the whatever possession had happened earlier, that will come back to the secured creditor. Okay, if any management of the borrower's business was taken over, then again that will be restored, etc. So in whosever favor the appeals decision is given, accordingly the steps will be taken ahead. Okay, and the DRT has to try to dispose of this appeal as soon as possible or as expeditiously as possible, like they have called it here, and they have to dispose it off within a period of 60 days. Okay, they have to dispose it off within a period of 60 days from the date of application. Appeal we had to file within a period of 45 days and they have to dispose it of within a period of 60 days. Okay, similarly now, suppose if here the borrower is residing, suppose if here the borrower, acha, one more thing here, if suppose, if it is not disposed of within a period of 60 days, then this can be extended further and the total period should not exceed a period of 4 months. Okay, so filing, I'm repeating it again, we have to go and file the appeal within a period of 45 days, that has to be disposed of within a period of 60 days. 60 days can be condoned further, but the total period should not exceed a period of 4 months. Okay, just remember, it's not 60 days plus 4 months. Okay, it's 4 months including 60 days. Okay, now in the similar case, suppose if that particular borrower is residing in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and if he is aggrieved by the measures taken under section number 13, then in that case he can go and file the appeal before the court of district judge, right? Before the court of district judge, no time period etc. has been prescribed here, right? Then in that case, after that, suppose going to the next level of appeal, okay, to the non-Jammu Kashmir cases, okay, to the non-Jammu Kashmir cases, if any of the person, okay, if any of the party is aggrieved by the decision given by the DRT, then that particular person can go and file an appeal before the appellate tribunal. Okay, it can go and file the appeal before the appellate tribunal within a period of 30 days. Ma'am, 30 days from when? 30 days from the date of the receipt of the DRT's order. So whenever we have received the DRT's order, from that day within a period of 30 days, we can go and file an appeal to the appellate tribunal. Okay, now here in this case, appellate tribunal is going to dispose of the appeal as per the provisions of some other act called as the RDD BFI Act. Okay, called as the RDD BFI Act 1993. The appeal etc. appeal provisions, disposal of appeal will be done as per the provisions of that act. Okay, one special point coming up in this particular section is, whenever the borrower wishes to go and file the appeal before the appellate tribunal, he has to deposit 50% of the outstanding debt either as determined by the DRT or as determined by the secured creditor, whichever is lower. Okay, whatever amount has been determined by them, whichever is lower, into 50%, that much amount has to be given as a deposit to the appellate tribunal. But seeing to some circumstances etc., they are telling that appellate tribunal can reduce this percentage from 50%, it can reduce this percentage to 25%. Okay, so instead of 50%, it can be any percentage up to 25%. Okay, and similarly, talking about the person who was the resident of Jammu and Kashmir, for that particular person, initially he had gone to the court of the district judge. Right now, if he is aggrieved by the decision of the court of the district judge, then it can go and make an application directly before the High Court. Okay, it can go and make an application or appeal before the High Court again within a period of, within how many days? Again within a period of 30 days. Okay, now when it goes and files the appeal within a period of 30 days, again that paying the deposit 50%, 25%, same to same copy paste clause is applicable even for the residents of Jammu and Kashmir, right? And then the next part, a small part in the chapter, not very important, but we can just understand and we can just revise it once, that is caveat. Okay, if any particular person has a hint or has an apprehension that some person is going to file a case against me, then I can go and file an application in form of a request to the court that, sir, please do not pass any particular order unless you give me a notice about the case being filed against me. Okay, then in that case, the document that we are filing with the court, that document is called as a caveat, and the person who is filing this particular document, that particular person is called as a caveator. Okay, so I am going to go and submit this to the court, and this caveat is going to be valid for a maximum period of 90 days. Whenever I go and submit this document to the court, whenever any other person goes and files a case against me, then the court will first intimate me about the case being filed, and then only it can pass any particular order. Okay, similarly, the caveator is also supposed to file that notice of caveat with the person on whom I have a doubt that this person can file a case against me. So it becomes an obligation on that third person also, that whenever he goes and files a case against me in the court, even he has to submit all the documents, papers, etc. with me also. Okay, so that basically I get an opportunity to represent my case before the court. Okay, now whenever the possession whenever the possession of the assets etc take place, but later on in the appeal we come to know that the borrower was not at all guilty. Okay, if the borrower was not at all guilty and for no reasons, he was harassed, he was aggrieved etc, then in that case if he asks for any compensation, okay, if he asks for any compensation, or if he says that I have incurred some amount of cost etc for all these proceedings, then the court can direct, okay, the court can direct the other party to pay to the borrower the required amount of compensation and the cost. Okay, this will be decided by the court. How much will be paid, that will be decided by the court. And then we have the last point coming up here. That is, first of all, in case of NBFCs, the law will be applicable to the NBFCs only if it has an asset base, of more than or equal to rupees 500 crore, and it can invoke SARFAESI, it can apply SARFAESI only to those cases where the individual case value is more than rupees 1 crore. Okay, and the next point, NPA classification we have already studied in IPCC also, and now also we can just revise it, that NPA classification happens after a period of 90 days. Okay, 90 days. Whenever the due date is there, from that day we'll calculate 90 days. Only after that the debt is classified as a non-performing asset. Okay, why are they using the word asset? The word asset is used because for banks, financial institutions, etc., we use the word asset. And SARFAESI comes into picture. Only. It came into force. It was deemed to have come into force from 21st of June 2002, may be relevant from MCQ point of view, maybe if they are just testing your memory, right? So this was all about your SARFAESI provisions. I hope I am very, very clear with these particular provisions of SARFAESI.